Have you ever found yourself saying yes when every fiber of your being screamed no? Have you ever followed someone's advice against your better judgment, only to regret it later? If so, you're not alone. Millions of people struggle daily with a fundamental question that shapes the very core of their existence. Should we remain loyal to others at the expense of betraying ourselves, or is there a different path altogether? This isn't just a philosophical debate. It's a practical crisis that affects our relationships, careers, mental health, and overall sense of fulfillment. The good news is that there's a way to navigate this seemingly impossible choice. And by the end of this exploration, you'll discover how to achieve both authentic self-loyalty and genuine connection with others without sacrificing either. From childhood, human beings are nurtured in an environment where obedience is considered a virtue. We are taught to listen to our parents, follow our teachers, obey our superiors, and walk in the footsteps of those who came before us. This dependency runs so deep that when we reach adulthood, we often seek someone to whom we can delegate our decision-making power, a leader, a master, a belief system. But behind this safe facade lies the loss of our ability to self-direct and our loyalty to ourselves. When we follow someone blindly, the connection between ourselves and that person is no longer based on clarity, but on the need to be led. This need stems from fear. Fear of making mistakes, fear of loneliness, fear of taking responsibility for our own path. In this state, loyalty is no longer natural respect, but a form of dependency. We become leaves drifting in the current of another's flow, no longer sensing clearly the direction of our own journey. Being loyal to oneself doesn't mean being selfish or closed off. It requires honesty and courage to look at the truth of ourselves, including our dark sides, our contradictions, our secret longings. It means living from an unborrowed center, where every action is not imposed by the fear of abandonment or the desire to be accepted. When we are loyal to ourselves, we no longer need to obey anyone. We can listen to advice, learn from others, but not turn them into sources of absolute truth. We can respect a person without losing our ability to question and verify for ourselves. At that point, relationships become free, unbound by the roles of leader and follower. The paradox is that when we're loyal to ourselves, we actually become more genuine and kind to others. Because now, we don't approach anyone with selfish motives or the need for their approval. We meet them as free human beings meeting each other. No one a higher position, no one lower. Loyalty to everyone, at this point, is not mass submission, but honesty and respect given to each individual, regardless of who they are. Conversely, when loyalty is misplaced, when we attach it to an individual, an organization, or an ideology, we easily fall into conflict. Once that faith is tested, we are forced to choose between truth and our oath to the person or system we follow. Many historical tragedies stem from people being absolutely loyal to a leader or doctrine to the point of turning their backs on their own conscience. Loyalty to oneself is not a state achieved in a day. It requires continuous observation, because the self we think is real is sometimes just a collection of habits, memories, and social influences. Only when we recognize and remove each layer of that influence can we make contact with an unconditioned honesty. From there, loyalty to everyone is no longer a moral slogan, but a natural result. We don't need to try to treat people well or respect anyone. We do it because there's no reason to do otherwise. Without the fear of loss or the desire to control, we can let each person be themselves, just as we are allowed to be ourselves. And perhaps this is the highest form of loyalty, not bound by blindness, not imposed by rules, but arising from absolute inner freedom. To understand this transformation more deeply, let's examine the practical mechanics of how misplaced loyalty develops and how it can be redirected. Consider the workplace environment where many of us spend the majority of our waking hours. Here, the pressure to demonstrate loyalty to superiors, company policies, and organizational culture can be overwhelming. We witness colleagues who advance by agreeing with everything their bosses say, even when those decisions clearly contradict common sense or ethical principles. We see people who have built their entire professional identity around being team players, which often translates to never questioning, never challenging, never bringing their authentic perspective to the table. This dynamic creates what psychologists call learned helplessness, a state where individuals become so accustomed to deferring their judgment to others that they lose confidence in their own ability to make sound decisions. The person who consistently chooses loyalty to the organization over loyalty to their own values eventually finds themselves in a position where they no longer recognize their own voice. They become expert at reading the room, anticipating what others want to hear, and molding their responses accordingly. But this adaptability comes at a tremendous cost: the gradual erosion of their authentic self. The same pattern manifests in personal relationships. How many people remain in friendships where they constantly suppress their true thoughts and feelings to avoid conflict? How many romantic partnerships are built on the foundation of one person consistently sacrificing their needs to keep the other happy? This isn't love or loyalty. It's a form of self-abandonment disguised as virtue. The person who always says whatever you want or I don't mind might appear easygoing and considerate, but they're actually avoiding the vulnerability that comes with expressing their authentic preferences and desires. Over time, this pattern creates resentment, both toward others and toward themselves. The resentment toward others comes from the unconscious expectation that they should somehow know and care for our unexpressed needs. The resentment toward ourselves comes from the recognition that we've been complicit in our own invisibility. This is where the practice of self-loyalty becomes not just philosophical ideal, but practical necessity. To begin cultivating loyalty to oneself, we must first develop what might be called internal awareness, the ability to recognize our genuine thoughts, feelings, and impulses as they arise before they get filtered through our learned patterns of people-pleasing or authority-deferring. This requires creating space between stimulus and response, between what happens to us and how we react. One practical approach is to begin each day with a few minutes of honest self-inquiry. Not meditation in the traditional sense, but a simple checking in with ourselves. What am I actually feeling right now? What do I genuinely want today? What are my real priorities beneath the shoulds and supposeds? This isn't about becoming self-absorbed or narcissistic. It's about establishing a baseline of self-awareness from which authentic interaction with others becomes possible. As this self-awareness develops, we begin to notice the countless small moments throughout each day where we have the opportunity to choose between self-loyalty and self-betrayal. The colleague who asks us to cover for their mistake when we're already overwhelmed with our own responsibilities. The friend who consistently shows up late and expects us to accommodate their schedule. The family member who makes decisions that affect everyone without consulting others, then expects support regardless. In each of these situations, we have a choice. We can respond from our conditioned pattern of automatic accommodation, or we can pause and ask ourselves, what would loyalty to my authentic self look like in this moment? This doesn't mean becoming rigid or uncompromising. True self-loyalty often involves flexibility and consideration for others. But it's flexibility that comes from strength rather than weakness, consideration that comes from choice rather than compulsion. When we speak from this place, our words carry a different quality. They're not defensive or aggressive because they're not coming from a place of internal conflict. They're simply honest expressions of our authentic position. The person who has developed this capacity might say to the overwhelmed colleague, "I understand you're in a difficult situation, and I want to help when I can. Right now, I'm at capacity with my own commitments, so I can't take this on. Let's think about other solutions." This response demonstrates both self-loyalty and genuine care for the other person. It doesn't sacrifice the self to help others, nor does it dismiss others' needs in service of the self. It acknowledges the reality of the situation and invites collaborative problem solving from a place of honesty rather than resentment or martyrdom. Similarly, with a chronically late friend, self-loyalty might sound like, "I've noticed that when we make plans, I often end up waiting, and it's starting to affect how I feel about our time together. I value our friendship, so I'd like to find a way to handle this that works for both of us." This isn't about punishing or controlling the other person. It's about being honest about the impact of their behavior and creating space for the relationship to evolve in a healthier direction. The family member who makes unilateral decisions might hear, "I care about our family dynamics, and I've realized I need to be more honest about my perspective when decisions affect all of us. I'd like to be included in the conversation next time." Again, this comes from a place of self-respect rather than victimhood, and it opens the door for more authentic family interaction. But developing this capacity requires practice, and the practice often involves working through layers of conditioning that run very deep. Many of us learned early that our worth was contingent on our usefulness to others, our ability to anticipate and meet their needs, our willingness to put their comfort before our own. These patterns don't dissolve overnight simply because we intellectually understand their limitations. The practice of self-loyalty involves repeatedly choosing to honor our authentic experience, even when, especially when, it feels uncomfortable or unfamiliar. It means learning to tolerate the anxiety that arises when we stop automatically deferring to others. It means developing the capacity to sit with others' disappointment when we can't or won't meet their expectations. It means accepting that some relationships may change or even end as we become more authentic, and trusting that the relationships that remain will be built on a more solid foundation. This process often involves what might be called loyalty experiments, small, low-stakes situations where we practice expressing our authentic perspective or honoring our genuine needs. Maybe it's choosing the restaurant for once instead of always deferring to others' preferences. Maybe it's speaking up in a meeting when we have a different viewpoint. Maybe it's saying no to a social invitation when we genuinely need time alone, rather than making up an excuse about being busy. Each of these small acts of self-loyalty builds our capacity for larger ones. We begin to discover that the world doesn't end when we stop being endlessly accommodating. In fact, we often find that others respect us more when we demonstrate self-respect. People are drawn to authenticity, even when, perhaps especially when, it challenges their own patterns of inauthenticity. As we develop greater loyalty to ourselves, something interesting happens in our relationships with others. Rather than becoming more selfish or isolated, we often find ourselves becoming more genuinely generous and connected. This seems counterintuitive, but makes perfect sense when we understand the dynamics involved. When we're operating from self-betrayal, our apparent generosity is often contaminated by hidden agendas. We give in order to be liked, to avoid conflict, to maintain our image as a good person, or to create obligations in others. This kind of giving creates resentment in the giver and often discomfort in the receiver, who may sense the strings attached even if they can't articulate what they're feeling. But when we give from a place of self-loyalty, our generosity is clean. We give because we genuinely want to, because it aligns with our values and brings us joy, not because we feel we have to or because we expect something in return. This kind of giving is actually received more easily by others because it doesn't come with hidden emotional debts or expectations. The person who has learned to be loyal to themselves can say yes wholeheartedly when they mean yes, and no clearly when they mean no. This clarity is a gift to everyone involved because it eliminates the guesswork and manipulation that often characterize relationships built on people-pleasing patterns. Others know where they stand with such a person, and they can trust that their expressions of care and support are genuine rather than strategic. This transformation also affects how we handle conflict and disagreement. When we're operating from self-betrayal, conflict feels threatening because it challenges our strategy of maintaining harmony through accommodation. We either avoid it entirely, which allows problems to fester, or we engage in it defensively, trying to prove we're right rather than seeking understanding. But when we're grounded in self-loyalty, conflict becomes simply another form of communication. We can disagree with someone without making them wrong or bad. We can stand firm in our position without needing to convince others to adopt it. We can listen to criticism without immediately defending or deflecting, because our sense of worth isn't dependent on others' approval. This creates space for the kind of honest dialogue that actually resolves issues rather than just suppressing them temporarily. In intimate relationships, this shift is particularly profound. Many romantic partnerships operate on what might be called complementary dysfunction. One person is the perpetual accommodator, the other is the perpetual decision maker. One is the emotional caretaker, the other is the one who needs care. One sacrifices their needs, the other expects their needs to be prioritized. These dynamics can feel stable and even comfortable, but they prevent both people from experiencing true intimacy, which requires two whole individuals choosing to share their lives rather than two half people trying to complete each other. When both partners develop loyalty to themselves, the relationship transforms from a system of mutual dependency to a collaboration between equals. Each person takes responsibility for their own emotional well-being, their own fulfillment, their own growth. This doesn't mean they don't support each other, quite the opposite. But their support comes from overflow rather than depletion, from choice rather than obligation. They can be present for each other's struggles without trying to fix or rescue. They can celebrate each other's successes without feeling diminished by comparison. They can navigate differences of opinion without one person automatically deferring to the other. The same principle applies to parenting. Many parents operate from the belief that good parenting means constant self-sacrifice, putting their children's needs before their own in every situation. While children certainly need care and attention, parents who consistently betray themselves in service of their children often model unhealthy relationship patterns. Children learn more from what they observe than from what they're told. And a child who grows up watching a parent consistently suppress their own needs learns that this is what love looks like. Conversely, parents who model healthy self-loyalty teach their children that it's possible to care for others while also honoring oneself. They demonstrate that boundaries are acts of love rather than selfishness, that it's okay to have needs and preferences, that relationships work best when everyone's authenticity is welcomed rather than suppressed. This doesn't mean being permissive or failing to provide appropriate structure and guidance. It means doing so from a place of genuine care rather than martyrdom or control. The practice of self-loyalty also transforms our relationship with authority and institutions. Instead of automatically deferring to those in positions of power, we develop the capacity to evaluate their requests and demands based on our own sense of what's right and appropriate. This doesn't mean becoming rebellious or oppositional. It means becoming discerning. We can respect expertise and experience without surrendering our critical thinking. We can follow rules and procedures that make sense while questioning those that don't serve the greater good. We can work within systems while maintaining our integrity and advocating for positive change when needed. This shift often requires us to confront our deep conditioning around authority. Many of us learned early that questioning authority figures was dangerous or disrespectful, that our job was to comply rather than think for ourselves. But healthy societies actually depend on citizens who can think critically and act from their own moral compass, even when, especially when, it conflicts with official directives. History is full of examples of individuals who chose loyalty to their own conscience over loyalty to corrupt leaders or unjust systems, and their courage often catalyzed positive social change. In our daily lives, this might look like the employee who speaks up about unethical business practices, the student who challenges a professor's biased statements, the citizen who questions government policies that seem harmful or unjust. These acts of conscience require tremendous courage because they often come with real risks: job loss, social ostracism, academic penalties, legal consequences. But they also represent the highest expression of human dignity and responsibility. The person who has developed genuine self-loyalty understands that some things are more important than personal comfort or security. They recognize that betraying their deepest values in order to maintain external stability ultimately creates a different kind of suffering: the suffering of living a life that feels hollow and meaningless. This doesn't mean being reckless or unnecessarily confrontational. True self-loyalty includes wisdom about timing, strategy, and consequences. It means choosing our battles carefully and acting from love rather than anger or ego. But it also means being willing to take stands when our core values are at stake, even when it's difficult or costly. As we develop this capacity, we often find that our definition of loyalty itself begins to change. Instead of seeing loyalty as blind allegiance to particular people or institutions, we begin to understand it as fidelity to principles and values that transcend any individual or organization. We become loyal to truth, to justice, to compassion, to integrity, and we express that loyalty through our relationships and commitments rather than in spite of them. This shift allows us to maintain deep connections with others while also maintaining our autonomy and authenticity. We can love someone deeply without agreeing with everything they do. We can commit to an organization or cause without losing our ability to see its flaws and work for improvement. We can honor tradition while also being open to necessary change. The key is that our loyalty flows from our own center rather than from external pressure or internal compulsion. Perhaps most importantly, this journey toward authentic self-loyalty helps us develop what might be called compassionate boundaries. These are limits we set not from anger or resentment, but from love for ourselves, and ultimately love for others. When we consistently betray ourselves to accommodate others, we often end up feeling angry and resentful, which poisons our relationships and makes genuine connection impossible. But when we honor our authentic needs and limits, we can engage with others from a place of openness and generosity rather than depletion and resentment. These compassionate boundaries also protect others from the harmful effects of our self-betrayal. When we say yes when we mean no, we often end up doing things half-heartedly or with hidden resentment. When we suppress our authentic thoughts and feelings, we often end up expressing them indirectly through passive-aggressive behavior or emotional withdrawal. When we consistently accommodate others at our own expense, we may unconsciously expect them to reciprocate in ways they never agreed to, leading to disappointment and conflict. By maintaining loyalty to ourselves, We actually create the conditions for healthier, more honest, and more satisfying relationships with others. We show up as whole people rather than as fragments trying to please or manipulate. We offer our genuine gifts rather than performing roles we think others want us to play. We create space for others to be authentic as well, because we're not trying to control their responses or manage their emotions. This is the ultimate paradox and the ultimate resolution. By learning to be truly loyal to ourselves, we become capable of genuine loyalty to others. Not the conditional loyalty that depends on their behavior meeting our expectations. Not the fearful loyalty that stems from our need to be needed, but the free loyalty that flows from abundance rather than scarcity, from love rather than fear, from choice rather than compulsion. This is loyalty in its highest form, not bound by blindness, not imposed by rules, but arising from absolute inner freedom.